A rock show is like a high-wire act without a net. It takes focus, energy, and precision. But what happens when the star on the wire is in no condition to even walk a straight line? We're diving into the legendary stories of heavy metal icons who were so out of it, their concerts turned into legendary disasters. One frontman's meltdown even led to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from his own fans. 1. Ozzy Osbourne. Many people know Ozzy Osbourne as the Prince of Darkness, a true icon of heavy metal. He was the voice of Black Sabbath, a band that basically invented the genre. You see, in the 1970s, Black Sabbath was on top of the world, creating dark, heavy music that had never been heard before. They were pioneers, and their live shows were legendary. But not all things are what they seem. Behind the curtains, the band, and especially Ozzy, were deep into a lifestyle of excess that was starting to take its toll. The thing nobody tells you is just how bad it got. By the late 70s, Ozzy's behavior was becoming a huge problem. He was often in no condition to even show up for rehearsals, let alone perform in front of a massive audience. His bandmates, who were not exactly angels themselves, were getting tired of it. They were trying to write new music for their next album, a record that would become heaven and hell, but Ozzy was often nowhere to be found. To put it mildly, his head was in the clouds. What many overlooked was the pressure he was under. After years of non-stop touring and recording, combined with his unhealthy habits, he was burning out. It all came to a head in 1979. The band was supposed to be working, but Ozzy's performance was so unreliable that they finally made a decision that shocked the music world. They fired him. Imagine that, getting kicked out of the band you helped create. It was a massive blow, but it was a move the rest of the band felt they had to make to survive. It was a clear sign that his on-stage and off-stage antics had finally gone too far. Ozzy's departure from Black Sabbath was a huge moment, but another legendary band was about to tear itself apart for the very same reasons. 2. Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses. In the late 1980s, no band on the planet was bigger or more dangerous than Guns N' Roses. Their music was a raw, powerful mix of hard rock and heavy metal, and their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, is still one of the best-selling albums of all time. It sold over 30 million copies worldwide. They had a reputation for being the wildest band in the world, and they lived up to it every single night. At the heart of their powerful sound was the drumming of Steven Adler. His unique groove gave the band its signature swing. But here's the kicker. The band's wild reputation was fueled by some very serious personal demons, and Steven Adler was struggling more than anyone. The lifestyle that made them famous was also tearing them apart from the inside. His issues with powerful substances started to affect his ability to play. The thing nobody tells you is how hard it is to be a professional musician when you're battling those kinds of problems. A drummer is the backbone of a band, and if the backbone is weak, the whole body collapses. It got to the point where Adler's performance was suffering badly. He would show up to recording sessions unable to play his parts. During live shows, his timing would be off, and he lacked the power and energy that had made him famous. This is why this is huge. The rest of the band, especially Axl Rose and Slash, were getting frustrated. They were at the peak of their fame, playing in massive stadiums, and their drummer couldn't keep up. In 1990, after struggling to record his parts for the Use Your Illusion albums, the band made the tough decision to let him go. He was fired from the biggest band in the world because his personal habits had made him too unreliable to perform. The drummer was the first to fall, but the band's iconic guitarist was about to have his own very public on-stage meltdown. 3. Slash of Guns N' Roses. When you think of Guns N' Roses, you think of Axl's unique voice and Slash's iconic top hat and blistering guitar solos. Slash is, without a doubt, one of the greatest guitar players in rock history. His style is a perfect blend of bluesy feel and heavy metal power. He created some of the most memorable guitar riffs ever, from Sweet Child O' Mine to Welcome to the Jungle. He was the cool, quiet force in the band, letting his guitar do all the talking. You see, while Axl Rose was the wild, unpredictable frontman, Slash was also no stranger to the party lifestyle. The entire band was famous for its excesses, and Slash was right there in the middle of it. For a while, they managed to walk that tightrope between chaos and brilliance. Their live shows were explosive and unpredictable, which is exactly what the fans loved. But there's a fine line between rock and roll energy and a complete mess. In 1991, the band was playing a show at the famous Ritz venue in New York City. What many overlooked is that this show was being filmed, so any mistakes would be captured forever. Slash was in a particularly rough state that night. When it was time to play their massive hit, Welcome to the Jungle, he started the iconic opening riff completely wrong. He was playing in the wrong key and fumbling the notes. The rest of the band looked confused, trying to figure out what was going on. They eventually managed to get through the song, but it was a sloppy, embarrassing moment for a band known for their musical power. It was a clear sign that his habits were starting to seriously affect his legendary playing abilities. While the guitarist was fumbling his notes, the band's frontman was about to cause a full-blown riot with his behavior. 4. Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. Axl Rose is one of the most charismatic and controversial frontmen in the history of music. With his incredible vocal range and wild stage presence, he led Guns N' Roses to global stardom. When Axl was on his game, he was unstoppable, but he was also known for his unpredictable temper and his tendency to start shows late, or sometimes not at all. This made every Guns N' Roses concert a thrilling but risky experience for fans. You never knew what you were going to get. The thing nobody tells you is that this behavior wasn't just an act. Axl was a perfectionist who wanted control over every aspect of the show, and he had a very short fuse. In July of 1991, the band was playing a show near St. Louis, Missouri. The concert was going along as usual until Axl spotted someone in the crowd with a camera. Back then, professional cameras were not allowed at shows. Axl pointed out the person to security, but when they didn't act fast enough for his liking, he took matters into his own hands. He yelled into the microphone, "I'll take it then," and then did something unbelievable. He dove headfirst off the stage, right into the middle of the crowd, to confront the fan himself. After a brief scuffle, he was pulled back on stage by security. He grabbed his microphone, announced, "Well, thanks to the lame security, I'm going home," slammed the mic on the stage, and walked off. The rest of the band followed, and the show was over. The crowd of over 15,000 people was furious. They had just watched the biggest rock star in the world throw a tantrum and end the show early. Their anger boiled over, and they started a full-blown riot, destroying the venue and the band's equipment. It was a night of total chaos, all started by a frontman who let his temper and his state of mind get the best of him. Axl's antics were legendary, but another frontman from the same era had a meltdown so bad it ended with a fistfight on stage. 5. Vince Neil of Motley Crue. If Guns N' Roses was the most dangerous band of the late 80s, Motley Crue was the poster child for 80s glam metal excess. With their big hair, makeup, and wild outfits, they took the world by storm. Their music was all about partying and having a good time, and they lived that message 24/7. The voice of the band was Vince Neil, whose high-pitched wail was perfect for their brand of rock and roll. Motley Crue was famous for their insane live shows, filled with pyrotechnics, spinning drum kits, and non-stop energy. You see, the party never stopped for Motley Crue, especially for Vince Neil. His life was a whirlwind of concerts, parties, and fast living. While this lifestyle inspired many of their biggest hits, like Girls, 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 and Kickstart My Heart, it also had a dark side. Vince's voice began to suffer from the constant strain and his unhealthy habits. Fans started to notice that he was struggling to hit the high notes that had made him famous. The problem became very clear during a solo show in Tampa, Florida in 2006. To put it mildly, Vince was not in good shape. From the very beginning of the concert, it was obvious that he was seriously under the influence. He stumbled around the stage, slurred his words between songs, and could barely remember the lyrics to his own hits. The band tried their best to cover for him, but it was no use. The performance was a complete disaster. He struggled through a few songs before walking off stage, ending the show early and leaving the audience angry and disappointed. It was a sad display from a singer who was once on top of the rock world. The singer's onstage troubles were bad, but the band's bassist took things to a level that almost ended his life right after a show. 6. Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue. Nikki Sixx was the main songwriter and bassist for Motley Crue. He was the dark, brooding mind behind the band's biggest hits and their bad boy image. He wrote about the wildlife because he was living it harder than anyone. The band's autobiography, called The Dirt, is filled with some of the most shocking stories in music history, and many of the wildest tales belong to Nikki Sixx. He was known for his deep involvement with very powerful and dangerous substances. What many overlooked is that this lifestyle wasn't just for show. It was a very real and very dangerous battle. Nikki's personal demons followed him everywhere, from the recording studio to the stage. While he was a talented musician and songwriter, his habits often got in the way of his performance. There were many nights where he was so out of it on stage that he could barely play his bass lines correctly. He would look lost and disconnected, a shadow of the powerful performer he was known to be. The thing nobody tells you is how close he came to the edge. The most famous story happened in December of 1987. After a long night of partying, Nikki was given a substance that caused his heart to stop. For 2 full minutes, he was clinically gone. Paramedics managed to bring him back with 2 shots of adrenaline directly to the heart. This is why this is huge. This very incident became the inspiration for the Motley Crue hit song, "Kickstart My Heart." While this event happened after a show, it was the terrifying result of the same lifestyle that caused him to have so many sloppy and incoherent performances on stage. It was the ultimate wake-up call. Motley Crue defined 80s excess, but another glam band's guitarist had a meltdown on live television that got him instantly fired. 7. CC DeVille of Poison. Poison was another giant of the 80s glam metal scene. They were known for their catchy, fun-loving rock anthems like "Nothing But a Good Time" and the power ballad "Every Rose Has Its Thorn." They were a massive commercial success, selling over 45 million records. A huge part of their sound and their flashy image was lead guitarist CC DeVille. With his wild blonde hair and lightning-fast guitar solos, he was the perfect rock star for the MTV generation. But just like many of his peers, CC was also caught up in the party scene. His struggles with banned substances were well known and were causing major problems within the band. The other members, especially frontman Bret Michaels, were growing tired of his unreliable behavior. The tension between CC and the rest of the band was about to explode in the most public way imaginable. The moment came at the 1991 MTV Video Music Awards. This was a huge live television event with millions of people watching. Poison was scheduled to perform their hit song "Unskinny Bop." But when the music started, CC began playing the opening riff to a completely different song, "Talk Dirty to Me." He was visibly out of it, fumbling his parts and playing chaotically. The rest of the band shot him angry looks, trying to get him back on track, but the performance was a train wreck. As soon as they got backstage, a huge argument erupted. It got so bad that it turned into a physical fight between CC and Bret Michaels. That was the last straw. CC DeVille was fired from the band right then and there, all because of one disastrous performance on live TV. A disastrous TV performance is embarrassing, but another guitar hero from an even bigger band had a meltdown that ended a massive reunion tour. 8. Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen changed the world of electric guitar forever. What he did with the instrument was revolutionary. He brought a level of speed, creativity, and technical skill that no one had ever seen before. His band, Van Halen, became one of the biggest rock acts in the world, selling over 80 million albums. Eddie was a genius, a true master of his craft, but he also battled serious personal demons for most of his life, especially a long and difficult struggle with heavy drinking. You see, for many years, Eddie was able to function at a high level despite his habits. He could still go on stage and deliver mind-blowing performances. But by the early 2000s, his problems were getting much worse. In 2004, the band reunited with their second singer, Sammy Hagar, for a massive and highly anticipated tour. Fans were thrilled to see this version of the band back together. The tour was a huge financial success, but behind the scenes, it was a total disaster. Eddie was in a very dark place. His drinking was out of control, and his behavior on stage was becoming erratic. Fans who came to see their guitar hero were instead treated to a sad and sloppy spectacle. He would stumble around, mess up his own iconic solos, and sometimes just stop playing altogether. The final show of the tour was a complete catastrophe. Eddie was in such bad shape that he played incoherently, smashed one of his guitars in frustration, and then walked off the stage mid-show, ending the tour on the sourest note possible. It was a heartbreaking sight for anyone who loved his music. Eddie's struggles were shocking, but his own lead singer had a legendary on-stage failure years earlier at a festival that went down in history. 9. David Lee Roth of Van Halen. Before Sammy Hagar, the original and most famous singer of Van Halen was David Lee Roth, also known as Diamond Dave. He was the ultimate rock and roll ringmaster. With his high kicks, wild stories, and over-the-top personality, he was the perfect frontman for a party band like Van Halen. The combination of Eddie's guitar genius and Dave's showmanship was unstoppable. In the late 70s and early 80s, they were the kings of the rock world. Their reputation for partying was just as big as their reputation for music. They were known for their wild backstage demands and their non-stop lifestyle. To put it mildly, they embraced every cliché of the rock star life. This all came to a head at one of the biggest music events of the decade, the 1983 U.S. Festival. This was a massive 3-day concert in California, and Van Halen was one of the headliners. This is why this is huge. They were paid a record-breaking $1.5 million for their performance. With that much money on the line and a huge crowd in front of them, you would expect them to be at their best. They were not. The entire band was reportedly a mess that day, but David Lee Roth was in particularly bad shape. He was visibly intoxicated from the moment he walked on stage. He forgot the lyrics to their biggest songs, slurred his words, and rambled incoherently between songs. At one point, he even fell over. It was a sloppy, unprofessional performance that embarrassed the band and disappointed the hundreds of thousands of fans who had paid to see them. It went down in history as one of the most famous on-stage meltdowns ever. Van Halen's party attitude was famous, but another 70s rock legend's on-stage issues were so bad they were a major factor in his tragic end. 10. Bon Scott of AC/DC. Long before Brian Johnson's raspy voice became synonymous with AC/DC, the band was fronted by the legendary Bon Scott. Bon was a one-of-a-kind performer. He had a mischievous grin, a raw, bluesy voice, and a whole lot of charisma. He was the ultimate rock and roll outlaw, and he wrote lyrics that were clever, funny, and often a little bit naughty. With songs like Highway to Hell and Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, Bon and AC/DC became international superstars. The thing nobody tells you is that Bon Scott lived the life he sang about. He was a notorious party animal, known for his incredible capacity for drinking. This was a huge part of his public image and his charm. He was the fun-loving bad boy that fans adored, but this lifestyle had a very dark side. His heavy drinking started to seriously affect his health and his ability to perform. There were numerous shows during the late 70s where Bon was clearly too drunk to be on stage. He would slur his words, forget lyrics, and sometimes even stumble and fall. The rest of the band, particularly the Young brothers Angus and Malcolm Young, were dedicated to their music and were reportedly frustrated by Bon's behavior. They would often have to cut shows short or carry him through the performance. Tragically, this story does not have a happy ending. In February of 1980, after a long night of heavy drinking in London, Bon Scott passed out in a car and passed away. His on-stage struggles were a clear warning sign of the tragedy to come. Bon Scott's story is heartbreaking, but another band's drummer was also let go for the exact same reason, just as they were about to become superstars. 11. Phil Rudd of AC/DC. After the tragic loss of Bon Scott, AC/DC did the unthinkable. They found a new singer, Brian Johnson, and released the album Back in Black, which became one of the best-selling albums of all time. It seemed like nothing could stop them. Powering their simple, driving rock and roll was the steady, powerful drumming of Phil Rudd. He wasn't a flashy drummer, but he had the perfect feel for their music. He was the rock-solid foundation that the young brothers built their guitar riffs on. You see, even after the wake-up call of Bon Scott's passing, the rock and roll lifestyle continued to cause problems for the band. Phil Rudd also had his struggles with unhealthy habits, and his behavior started to become erratic. Tensions grew between him and the band's leader, Malcolm Young. The two men had very strong personalities, and their disagreements reportedly became more and more frequent. The breaking point came in 1983. The band was in the middle of recording their next album, Flick of the Switch. Phil's problems had reached a point where he was becoming unreliable. According to the stories, his issues led to a physical confrontation between him and another member of the band's circle. What many overlooked is that for a band as disciplined as AC/DC, this kind of chaos was unacceptable. Shortly after the incident, Phil Rudd was fired from the band. Just like their original singer, his personal choices made it impossible for him to continue his role in one of the world's biggest rock bands. Getting kicked out for partying is one thing, but what about a guitarist who was fired before his band even recorded their most famous album? 12. Pete Willis of Def Leppard. In the early 1980s, a new wave of British heavy metal was exploding, and at the forefront was a young band from Sheffield, England, called Def Leppard. They combined heavy guitar riffs with catchy pop melodies, and they were poised for superstardom. One of the architects of their sound was guitarist Pete Willis. He was a co-founder of the band, and his heavy, aggressive riffing style was a key part of their early albums. As the band's popularity grew, so did the temptations of the rock star life. Pete Willis developed a serious problem with heavy drinking. This became a major issue as the band began working on what would become their masterpiece, the album Pyromania. This was the album that would break them in America and sell over 10 million copies. The recording sessions were intense, with their producer, Mutt Lange, pushing them to be perfect. The thing nobody tells you is that Pete Willis's drinking was making it impossible for him to keep up. He would show up to the studio unable to play his parts correctly. He would struggle through take after take, slowing down the entire process. Mutt Lange and the rest of the band were getting incredibly frustrated. This album was their big shot, and Pete's behavior was putting it all at risk. In July of 1982, in the middle of the recording sessions for their most important album, the band made the painful decision to fire him. It was a brutal move, but one they felt was necessary to save their career. Losing a member during recording is tough, but another band's frontman had a public breakdown so intense it led to fans suing him for millions. 13. Scott Stapp of Creed. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Creed was one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Their brand of post-grunge rock was hugely popular, and they sold millions upon millions of albums. Their frontman, Scott Stapp, had a powerful, booming voice that was instantly recognizable. With hits like Higher and With Arms Wide Open, they filled arenas and stadiums across the globe. But behind the scenes, Scott Stapp was struggling with his own personal battles. He was dealing with serious personal issues and was reportedly using various substances to cope. This began to affect his live performances. Fans who had paid good money to see the band were sometimes treated to strange and erratic behavior from the frontman. The most infamous incident happened in December of 2002 at a concert in Chicago. To put it mildly, Scott Stapp was in no condition to perform. According to fans who were there, he was a total mess. He was unable to sing the lyrics to his own songs. He laid down on the stage for long periods, and he even left the stage multiple times during the show. The performance was so shockingly bad that a group of fans who attended the concert actually filed a lawsuit against the band. They claimed that Stapp was so out of it that he was unable to sing the lyrics of a single Creed song. The lawsuit was eventually thrown out, but the story became a legendary example of an on-stage meltdown. A fan lawsuit is bad, but another 90s singer's personal demons became so public he could barely stand on stage, let alone sing. 14. Layne Staley of Alice in Chains. The Seattle grunge scene of the early 1990s produced some of the most powerful and influential music of the decade. One of the darkest and heaviest bands to come out of that scene was Alice in Chains. Their music was sludgy and full of haunting melodies and harmonies. At the center of that sound was the unforgettable voice of Layne Staley. His vocals were filled with pain and raw emotion, and he was one of the most distinctive singers of his generation. What many overlooked is that the darkness in their music was a direct reflection of what was happening in their lives. Layne Staley had a long and very public battle with severe substance dependency. His struggles became a central theme in his lyrics, and tragically, they began to completely take over his life. As the 90s went on, his health declined dramatically. This made it incredibly difficult for the band to tour. Layne's condition was so fragile that performing live became almost impossible. During their last few tours, he would often perform sitting down, looking frail and weak. His once powerful voice became a shadow of its former self. There were many shows where he was clearly struggling, too weak and out of it to deliver the kind of performance that had made him a star. The band eventually had to stop touring altogether because Layne was simply not well enough to continue. It was a heartbreaking end for one of the most powerful bands of the era. Layne's story is heartbreaking, but another powerful 90s frontman's own issues with substances led to him blacking out in the middle of a concert. 15. Phil Anselmo of Pantera. Pantera was one of the most important and influential heavy metal bands of the 1990s. They pretty much created a new genre of music called groove metal, with their heavy, down-tuned riffs and aggressive attitude. Leading the charge was their intense and intimidating frontman Phil Anselmo. He was a commanding presence on stage, with a powerful voice that could go from a deep growl to a high-pitched scream in an instant. You see, Phil was also dealing with some serious issues off stage. He had suffered a back injury that caused him constant, severe pain. To deal with the pain, he turned to very strong and habit-forming substances. This had a profound effect on his personality and his performance. His behavior became more erratic, and his stage banter became more aggressive and controversial. His substance use also led to some scary moments on stage. There were shows in the late 90s where he seemed to be completely out of it. He would ramble incoherently, and his performance would be sloppy and unfocused. The most shocking incident happened in 1996. Phil experienced a medical emergency due to his substance use shortly after a show. His heart stopped beating for several minutes before paramedics were able to revive him. While this didn't happen during the performance, it was the terrifying result of the same issues that were causing him to black out and deliver subpar performances on stage. It was a wake-up call that showed just how dangerous his lifestyle had become. Anselmo's intensity was legendary, but even the biggest metal band in the world wasn't immune, with their frontman battling his own demons in front of thousands. 16. James Hetfield of Metallica. Metallica is arguably the biggest heavy metal band of all time. From their early days as pioneers of thrash metal to their status as global stadium rock giants, they have dominated the music world for decades. The heart and soul of the band is frontman James Hetfield. His powerful right hand created some of the most iconic guitar riffs in history, and his angry, commanding voice is the sound of heavy metal for millions of fans. But in the band's early days, they were known by the nickname Alcoholica. They were famous for their heavy drinking and wild parties. James Hetfield, in particular, had a very serious and long-term battle with the bottle. The thing nobody tells you is that for a long time, this was just part of their image. It was part of the angry, rebellious energy that fueled their music. As the years went on, however, it became a serious problem. James's drinking started to affect his life and his ability to perform. There were shows where he was visibly drunk on stage, slurring his words and playing sloppily. The 2004 documentary, Some Kind of Monster, showed his struggles in raw detail. It all came to a head in 2001 when James had to leave the band and enter a treatment facility to deal with his issues. He eventually found sobriety and came back stronger than ever, but there was a long period where his on-stage performance was seriously hampered by the same demons he sang about in his songs.